A Tuesday that includes a chat with our good friend from the Omaha World-Herald, Sam McKewon. Good morning, Sam.
Hey, good morning, guys. How are you?
Before we start about the bye week and then the trip out to the East Coast, the story around the Big Ten, two things yesterday. One, that they are all behind the 2014 playoff. The other is, with those two numbers, the UC investments tied to the pension fund of the University of California, about the investment of $2.4 billion into the Big Ten. Michigan and USC have been the most vocal of opposition, and it's now been paused. I think they were going to have a vote later this week. Do we know Nebraska's position on this, or why isn't around here this more of a discussion?
We probably haven't done a good enough job of reporting on it. So I think Nebraska is in favor of it. I think the only two schools that are against it are USC and Michigan, although in theory, you could have proxies that are sort of saying, hey, you guys step up since you don't have presidents. And it makes it easier for you guys to, to sort of take the shots because there's no university presidents involved with those two schools. But it's hard to. I think part of what it is it's designed to infuse cash to all 18 universities to cover payments that debt that might be out there, and I don't know that Nebraska has as much as some other schools do. In fact, I'm very confident of that. But Nebraska has a stadium renovation I'm sure they'd like to do. And so now that you have to raise your own revenue to share with the student athletes, I think there's a desire to get infusion in, because some of these schools, they might be able to sustain and compete for a little bit of time, but then ultimately they're going to run into a wall where they have their debt that they have to pay off, and they have this revenue that they have to share with the athletes, and they're having to make hard choices, and then you have to further complicate your individual debt story at each individual university. And so I think that this deal is designed to try to be a rising tide that lifts all boats. Obviously, when you have a pension system involved, I mean, there's risk. Obviously, it goes without saying. The pension system, I assume, is tied to a market. Those are their investments made in the stock market. So I think that's probably some of it. I think Michigan and USC are opposed to it. Their boards are opposed to it. Both schools don't have presidents. So, I could see there being, it's on pause now. They're going to go back to the drawing board, I guess. What I find interesting is that the primary voice against this is somebody that's, clearly a political person in Michigan, and claiming that Michigan might leave the Big Ten, if this were to go through, and obviously that's not going to happen. So, the idea that we're amplifying threats that probably aren't going to occur is interesting. But it's been an interesting time in college sports. As far as 2014 playoff, I don't know where that's going to go. I mean, seems like a large number to me, but once you invited a playoff, you immediately create this bar of like anybody who makes the playoff has had a successful season, and anyone who doesn't hasn't. And at 4 teams, you could almost argue, well, only 4 teams made it. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
But now that it's 12, it feels a little bit more like, well, if you didn't make the playoff, and then then it went to, now you want to try to expand it out so that you're getting 5 or 6 Big Ten teams in the playoff, or 5 or 6 or 7 SEC teams, a handful of Big 12 teams. I understand the logic behind it. I think 16 is the right number, but I do understand the logic behind why they're approaching it the way they are.
Yeah, and it also seems like USC and Michigan, if you read between the tea leaves, are kind of out on this, private investment for different reasons. Sam, I want to ask you about yesterday at the press conference. It's a Penn State question, but it's not the type of Penn State question you think. Matt Rule was talking yesterday, and just about Joe Paterno, and he said, and this kind of not caught me by surprise, but got me thinking. He goes, Joe Paterno, Coach Paterno didn't talk a ton, right? I mean, he wasn't the most vocal guy, but he had an aura about him, the way he walked, his presence. And when he did talk, it mattered. My question to you is, Sam, with the modern athlete and in the modern day of college football, is that type of coaching gone? Can you do that nowadays with how important relationship building and how it just seems like athletes in this generation, need to be at times nurtured and really related to as much as possible?
That's a really good question, because I think what you're asking isn't so much, does the coach's words matter, but does a coach have to constantly reinforce the student athlete?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Paterno might, might say one speech a week, and it's like, all right, he's talking, shut up. These are words from on high or whatever. That's a good point. I don't know. I think that's a good question. There's probably a handful of coaches left where if they do that, I think maybe it still works.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there's that many, and they're probably seasoned veterans. So I've seen the St. John's documentary with Rick Pitino, and he actually talks quite a bit in it. But I don't know if Rick Pitino is doing that all the time and not in front of the cameras, and so it's possible that like a Rick Pitino could do that. But one could argue that Hurley is the best coach in college basketball. I get the impression that he never stops talking to his players. Like, it's a running dialogue all day long, and they might even hope that he stops talking to them. Like, so I get the impression that a guy like that is just carrying on all day. Like, he can't stop. And so I suspect that most coaches today are like that. Like, there's more coaches on the end of, like, Kenny Dillingham. You can tell that Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, he's a good coach, is probably talking to his players like nonstop, sending them messages, getting them together, getting them back on task. And I think that's probably the model today. And that probably has something to do with, modern young folks. And I've got a teenager. They're pretty glued to their phone sometimes. And so in order to get their attention, you got to be in constant communication with them so that they understand what's outside the bubble that they exist in. That's a good question. I suspect that it's very hard to be like that now. Very hard.
Can Nebraska win without an All-American type performance from Emmett on Saturday night?
Yes, they can. There's always that special teams touchdown. If you throw that on the board, Emmett can go 50, he can go 22 carries for 73 yards. They can win the game with an off-schedule score. So you can, when they won there in 2013, Kenny Bell had a kickoff return for a touchdown, and that's how they won the game. And so they obviously won in overtime, but the point being, they're not winning that game unless Kenny Bell returns a kickoff for a touchdown. So that's kind of how that happens. And Nebraska now has that in its back pocket. They always have that special teams card that they can play. And I don't know that that'll be happening on Saturday. My hunch is that Emmett will have to get 30 carries, and 6 catches, and 150, 160 total yards in order for Nebraska to win. But I'm guessing everybody down there would love a special teams score. I don't know that I see a defensive score on the docket. I think a lot of these teams have decided that the best way to play Nebraska is to run the football and to give it to your running backs. And so Nebraska has not generated a lot of takeaways in recent weeks. That's been hard for them. They haven't, but they haven't had a lot of opportunities to do so. I could how many takeaways they had in the last 4 games? Probably not a ton. It's just getting hard to do it. It's getting hard to accomplish because a lot of these teams aren't putting the ball in harm's way that much. And so, I think they'll have to do it with a special team score, or Emmett Johnson will have to have a whale.
This Penn State was in the Big Ten East, but do you see this as being a Big Ten West style football game?
As it turns out, yes, I think so. I think Penn State was probably the most. Michigan was too. Yes, I do. I mean, I think the way that Penn State plays, and it probably fits at this moment most closely with the style of play is Minnesota. They're better at it than Minnesota, or have been over the last several years. But yeah, I think that's an accurate statement. The majority of the league now, what's changed the league the most are those teams out west. They play a little bit differently, a little bit more spread ball, a little bit more screen game, a little bit different, a little bit better receivers than most of the Big Ten. For what it's worth, I thought Nebraska played USC real well Granted, they lost the game late, but I thought Nebraska matched up actually quite well with that. I think Penn State is a harder matchup because they're going to bring tight ends onto the field. They'll compress the field, and then they're going to try to punch holes in Nebraska's front. So just like Michigan, they'll compress the field. They're going to run more motion than Michigan does, and they're going to have more offset guys than Michigan does. And they're going to try different kinds of play action passes than Michigan did. But you'll see very similar thought processes, and Nebraska's going to have to do a better job than it did against Michigan because Nebraska's offense isn't as good as it was back then. Like it's a little bit different. And if Nebraska goes to Happy Valley and scores 21, I think you should be happy. That's about what I think it's going to take to win out there. At least, maybe it'll take 24. We'll see.
So 21, are we talking like 21-17? You think in that range?
Yeah. Yep, I think so. I think what you kind of hope is that Penn State has long drives. They might score on a couple of those drives, but it's an 8-possession game. Maybe Penn State scores on 4 of those possessions. Maybe Nebraska scores on 4 of its possessions. But the difference is Nebraska gets one more touchdown than field goal. So, like, I could see 21-20, something like that. So, I think that's probably the way to go. I don't think it's going to get into the 30s. Penn State hasn't really been that kind of team in recent weeks. So, low possessions should be a quick game. Shouldn't be a 4-hour deal unless it goes to OT. It's going to be a war of attrition. And Penn State's got a lot to play for. They want to play. They want to make a bowl. I don't think a lot of the players on that team, most of whom are seniors, give a crap who their new head coach is going to be. So they're going to play, and that's just what they're going to do. So I think they probably want to play for their coach, and they want to play for each other on senior day and all the rest. I think it's senior day. Maybe it isn't.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay. So I think they'll play real hard. And now with a win, under their wing from last week, they'll probably come in with some confidence. So I think it's a hard task for Nebraska. One of the harder games they've had this year.
I think I said it yesterday when Matt and I were talking. I think it's tougher than the Iowa game.
Yeah, me too. I think there's some motivation behind the Iowa game.
Yes,
that Nebraska is going to bring to that, and I think they've probably been preparing for it for a while. So I think. I know it's a short prep week. Physically, it'll be a toll that they have to deal with in terms of playing Iowa. But I think preparation-wise, they're going to be ready for Iowa. I'm not worried about that. I think they'll be prepared for what Iowa does, and they will play well against Iowa. Whether they win or not, I suppose, comes down to special teams. But I do think they'll play well against Iowa, irrespective of what happens this weekend.
You've sparked my interest here because you were describing the West Coast teams, and some of the things that you were saying about them, I thought applied to Nebraska. Sam, do you think Nebraska's built closer to some of those West Coast teams than they are Michigan?
Well, they don't want to be. I think that they could be in some ways. I think what keeps them from being what Michigan is, and Michigan has incorporated more spread tendencies with their new OC than they had in the past. And it's led to some turnovers, as maybe you saw. I think they would like to be a pro-style offense that surrounds a pro-style quarterback with all the weapons and then, plays from there and does all the things that you would do. Like, think of 06 Nebraska only with a stronger armed quarterback, which Dylan Raiola is a stronger armed quarterback than Zach Taylor. I think they would love that. Now, could you have spread tendencies? Could you build in some RPOs? Because that's what Dana Holgorsen does. Sure. But I think what they would love is that. Like, they'd love to have all the bells and whistles that they had in 06 or all the bells and whistles that they had around Taylor Martinez in 2010. Now, they weren't quite running a pro-style offense, but somewhat they were. And if you had all those kind of players, I think you would see an offense that is pretty dynamic in some ways. But they don't have all those players yet. And the players that they're honestly missing is they're missing a second running back. As good as Emmett is, you would love to have a change of pace guy. And then they're missing, additional tight ends. I think Heinrich Harburg's done a nice job of developing and coming along. But there were people before the season that were predicting he was going to have 40 catches. And it's the same people that predicted that Tanner Lee would throw for 4,000 yards. There's always this perpetual positivity around things that are unlikely to occur. And Heinrich Haarberg,
good way to describe things.
like, I tried to say this, I'm like, guys, you guys got to be careful with saying that Heinrich Haarberg's going to get 40 grabs. Like, that's just not. Thomas Fedoni just went to the NFL and he didn't have 40. Like, just be careful with like the predictions, or like Archie Wilson's going to average 59 yards a punt. I'm like, guys, like most of the guys that come over from Australia are way older than him, and like he needs a year or two. Like, there's always this sense of putting the cart before the horse with Nebraska. And the reality is, and Rule, I think, would tell you this in an honest moment of like where we want the roster to go. And by we, I'm saying, putting this in Rule's voice, we're not there yet. We're on the journey to it. And yes, you've got to go win in year 3 because that's just kind of the trajectory of the deal, which they've done. And they could go 9-3, which would be absolute progress over last year.
Oh.
But like where he wants to take the roster, it's not all the way there.
Yeah.
Like Callahan had some rosters. Bill Callahan had a hell of a roster in 06. And they had a really good roster in 09 and 2010. And then maybe even again in 2014 and 2015. But they don't have all of those players yet. Like, how much better do you think this team would be if they had Alex Lewis at tackle? They'd be better.
Yeah.
They don't have all that.
Yeah, the roster that he strives for is probably 2 years away.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I know they wanted to be next year. I know very much. They were like, okay, time to go, time to get all these, these linemen, and let's go. And, you might be right. I think I lean a little bit more toward where you're at, but I could also see, and I've talked to people about this, of like, hey, 8 months with this defensive line and let them develop. Maybe by next year, Keona Davis and Williams Lanieri are second team all Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I think they're missing on the defensive side of the ball, and this is going to sound like a completely unfair comparison, they're missing what the Philadelphia Eagles have in their interior linemen. Now, the irony of that is both those guys went to the same school at Georgia. You need one of those kind of guys. You need a 6'5", 317-pound guy, which they had when they had Ty Robinson. And I think they kind of need that again. Like, they need somebody who can really, really disrupt things inside. And right now, they're doing that with a lot of shifts and stunts. Keona Davis is sort of a Russell Maryland type player, but I think you really need one of the giants. You need one of these giant guys if you're going to run that defense. Or you got to go to a four-man like Iowa, and all Iowa's guys are like 270, and they're all kind of active, but they have a straight-up four-man line. And Nebraska doesn't want to do that. Well, if you don't want to do that, then you better have one of these giants that can sit in the middle and create havoc. And I don't know. They're either going to have to go buy that guy, or they're going to have to they're going to have to try to develop Riley Van Poppel to be that guy. And I think they were hoping RVP would be that this year, and he's still on the journey to get there.
Yep. Sam, as always, appreciate safe travels out to the East Coast. Enjoy in one of your favorite places.
One of our